sky over Los Angeles, once a vibrant canvas of blues and golds, has turned a menacing shade of gray. Smoke hangs heavy in the air, curling its way into neighborhoods and casting an eerie glow over the city of dreams. Sirens wail in the distance, helicopters buzz overhead, and a sense of unease blankets the streets. This isn't the LA most people picture, the one brimming with glamour, palm trees, and endless sunshine. This is a city on edge, gripped by a force as old as time, but now fueled by modern consequences: wildfires. Tonight, we're diving into a crisis that has become all too familiar for Southern California residents. With flames consuming acres of land at an alarming rate and thousands of lives disrupted, the question on everyone's mind is, why does this keep happening? And maybe more urgently, what's happening right now? For many, wildfires might feel like a distant disaster, something you see in the headlines but can't quite fathom. But here in LA, it's real. It's personal. Families are packing what they can carry and fleeing for safety. Firefighters are battling around the clock with everything they've got, and entire communities are watching their homes and their histories go up in smoke. You can feel the fear, the heartbreak, and the determination pulsing through the city. The causes of these infernos are as complex as the city itself. Climate change has undoubtedly made its mark, creating hotter, drier conditions that turn the California landscape into a tinderbox. But is that the whole story? What about the human factor? The sparks from power lines, the carelessness of a discarded cigarette, or worse, the shadow of arson? Could some of these flames have been preventable? We'll take you inside the chaos, where brave firefighters stand on the front lines, risking everything to keep the flames at bay. We'll meet the evacuees who are living a nightmare, unsure if they'll ever return to their homes, or if there will even be a home to return to. And we'll hear from the experts trying to untangle this web of natural and human-made factors that ignite these deadly blazes year after year. As the firestorm rages, it's not just the physical landscape that's being reshaped, it's the emotional and cultural heart of Los Angeles. The scars of this crisis will linger long after the last ember is extinguished. But right now, as the fires burn, we're left with questions that demand answers and a battle that feels far from over. So what's the latest on the Los Angeles wildfires? What caused them? And most importantly, how do we stop this cycle of destruction? The answers are as elusive as the wind driving the flames, but one thing is certain: the story of these wildfires is about more than just fire. It's a story of resilience, tragedy, and the fight to protect what matters most. The wildfires tearing through Los Angeles aren't just flames. They're symbols of a struggle that's as personal as it is collective. To understand why this happens year after year, we need to look back to the very foundation of this land, its climate, and the choices we've made along the way. But before we dive into the history, let's talk about the people. Imagine standing in the driveway of a house you've lived in for decades, smoke billowing in the distance. The sound of crackling fire creeps closer as the smell of burning wood fills the air. This is where we meet Maria, a retired teacher from Calabasas, clutching her grandmother's photo album to her chest. She's already packed her car with essentials: some clothes, important documents, and a handful of irreplaceable memories. But she pauses, looking back at her home, knowing it might be the last time she ever sees it standing. Her voice trembles as she says, "I thought we were safe this time, but now, I'm not so sure." Maria isn't alone. Across the hills, countless families are making similar choices. The firefighters, too, are facing an unimaginable battle. Captain James Ortega has been fighting wildfires for nearly 20 years. He calls these new fires a different beast. Standing on a ridge, drenched in sweat and covered in soot, he points out the patterns in the flames, how they move unpredictably, driven by fierce winds that can shift in seconds. "We used to have fire seasons," he explains, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "Now it's fire year, and every year they're getting worse." But how did we get here? For centuries, fires were part of California's natural ecosystem. Native tribes once used controlled burns to manage the land, clearing dry brush and promoting new growth. These fires were small, intentional, and vital for the balance of nature. But as the region became more developed, that balance began to shift. The land that once thrived with fire became a ticking time bomb, with every spark threatening disaster. Los Angeles, with its sprawling neighborhoods and iconic landscapes, is a city built on beauty and risk. The golden hills that attract tourists and filmmakers alike are also the perfect fuel for wildfires. Combine that with rising global temperatures, longer droughts, and invasive plant species, and you have a recipe for destruction. Yet, it's not just nature at work here. Human hands, often unintentionally, play a role in lighting the match. Take the 2018 Woolsey Fire, for instance, one of the most destructive in California's history. It started near the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, where electrical equipment malfunctioned. The fire spread rapidly, consuming nearly 100,000 acres and forcing hundreds of thousands to flee. That fire was a wake-up call, but it wasn't the last. Every year since, Los Angeles has faced new fires, each one more ferocious than the last. There's also the issue of climate change. Scientists warn that the planet is warming, and in California, that means drier winters, hotter summers, and more extreme weather. These conditions create what experts call a fire triangle: heat, fuel, and ignition. And when the winds pick up, the infamous Santa Anas, they fan even the smallest spark into an inferno. But here's where it gets complicated. While climate change and natural conditions play a major role, human activity can't be ignored. Faulty power lines, neglected infrastructure, careless campfires, and even acts of arson have all contributed to fires in recent years. There's a growing debate about accountability. Should power companies like PG&E, often blamed for equipment failures, shoulder more responsibility? Are local governments doing enough to clear brush and enforce fire safety regulations? Or is it simply too late to undo the damage already done? As we explore these questions, the tension only grows. Back at a temporary evacuation center in Northridge, families sit on cots, scrolling through their phones, desperate for updates. A young boy clutches his dog tightly while his father paces back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. These are the moments where time feels suspended, where the waiting becomes unbearable. Will their house be spared? Will the fire turn their way? No one knows, and that uncertainty is almost as suffocating as the smoke itself. Even the wildlife isn't spared. Rescue teams are working tirelessly to save animals trapped in the blaze, from deer caught in fences to birds grounded by thick ash-filled skies. Every creature here is a victim of this relentless cycle, and it's hard not to feel the weight of their struggle. But in the middle of all this devastation, there's a glimmer of hope, a sense of community that shines brightest in the darkest of times. Neighbors are opening their doors to those in need. Strangers are donating supplies, and volunteers are showing up in droves to help evacuees. Captain Ortega describes it best. It's not just about fighting fires. It's about protecting lives, human lives, animal lives, and the life of this land. That's what keeps us going. Still, the fires rage on, and the questions remain unanswered. How many more homes will be lost? How many more families will be displaced? And how long will it take before we find a solution, or at least some semblance of control? The battle is far from over. The fire isn't just a force of nature. It's a test of humanity's resilience and our ability to adapt in the face of an escalating crisis. And as the flames move closer to the heart of the city, the stakes couldn't be higher. This is the story of Los Angeles on fire. It's not just a tale of destruction. It's a story about choices, past, present, and future. And while we don't yet know how this chapter ends, one thing is certain: the road ahead is as unpredictable as the wind. As the fires continue to burn, their destructive paths reveal deeper layers of conflict. This isn't just a battle between people and nature. It's a collision of priorities, decisions, and realities that don't easily align. On one side are the firefighters, stretched to their limits, racing to protect lives and property. On the other are the evacuees, caught in a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. And then there are the questions no one wants to confront, but everyone feels. Could this have been prevented? In downtown Los Angeles, a press conference is underway. City officials stand in front of cameras, delivering updates with grim expressions. Behind them, the faces of reporters show a mix of skepticism and frustration. A journalist raises her hand, asking about funding cuts to wildfire prevention programs. The official's response is measured, almost rehearsed. "We're doing everything we can with the resources available," he says, but his tone carries an undertone of helplessness. The tension in the room is palpable. Outside, environmentalists gather to make their voices heard. "This is climate change in action," one protester shouts, holding a sign that reads, "Act now before we burn later." The crowd grows louder, their chants echoing down the street. Their argument is clear. Without significant action to address global warming, these fires will only get worse. But not everyone sees it the same way. Across the street, a smaller group of counter-protesters argue that restrictive policies, like banning certain developments in fire-prone areas, hurt homeowners and businesses. The divide is stark, and it's clear that the fires have sparked more than flames. They've ignited fierce debates about responsibility and solutions. Meanwhile, on the ground, the firefighters are pushing through exhaustion. Captain Ortega's team is stationed near a hillside where flames are threatening a row of homes. The winds are erratic, making it nearly impossible to predict the fire's next move. "It's like fighting a living, breathing monster," Ortega says, pausing to wipe the sweat from his face. His crew moves quickly, spraying water and digging fire lines, their faces lit by the orange glow of the blaze. Nearby, a family watches from a safe distance, tears streaming down their faces as they see the fire inch closer to their home. "We put everything into that house," the father says, his voice breaking. "Everything." His daughter, no older than 10, clutches a stuffed animal tightly. The sight is heart-wrenching, a reminder that behind every statistic is a story. A family, a life uprooted, a dream reduced to ashes. The environmental toll is just as devastating. In the Angeles National Forest, vast swaths of land are scorched, trees reduced to charred skeletons. Ecologists like Dr. Elena Rivera are on the front lines, trying to assess the damage. "These ecosystems take decades to recover," she explains, surveying the blackened landscape, "and some might never fully come back. The fires are burning hotter and faster than nature can handle." Elena points to a hillside where animals once roamed freely. "The wildlife here, they're running out of places to go. It's heartbreaking. And it's not just about the animals. This impacts the entire food chain, the air we breathe, the water we drink. It's all connected." Her words linger, heavy with a truth that feels impossible to ignore. Back at the evacuation center, Maria, the retired teacher, is trying to hold on to hope. Her neighborhood was one of the first to be evacuated, and she hasn't been able to get any updates on her house. "You don't realize how much you take for granted until it's all at risk," she says softly. "I just keep thinking about the little things. The garden I planted with my husband, the kitchen where I baked cookies with my grandkids. I just want it to still be there." In another corner of the center, a group of volunteers is sorting through donations. Clothes, food, blankets. One of them, a young woman named Kayla, says she's here because she knows what it's like to lose everything. "Our house burned down 3 years ago in the Woolsey fire," she shares. "It changes you. But it also shows you how much people care. That's why I'm here, to give back, even if it's just a little." The tension only deepens as new reports come in. Power outages are affecting thousands, adding another layer of stress for those already dealing with evacuation orders. Roads are clogged with traffic as people try to escape, and tempers flare as patience wears thin. Even the skies seem angry, filled with smoke that turns the sun into a dull red orb. And then there's the question no one wants to ask out loud. What if this isn't the last fire? What if next year or next month brings another, even worse? For some, the answer is too overwhelming to think about. For others, it's a call to action. But for now, all anyone can do is wait, watch, and hope. The fires may have started as a spark, but they've grown into something much larger, a reflection of our world, our choices, and the challenges we face. And as the flames continue to rage, one thing is clear. This story is far from over. As the sun sets over Los Angeles, the city takes on an eerie glow. The fires, visible from miles away, cast an orange light against the smoky sky. It's the kind of scene that feels almost apocalyptic, like something out of a disaster movie. But this is no script. It's real life. And for the people living it, there's no escape. The winds pick up again, driving the flames in unpredictable directions. Firefighters scramble to stay ahead, but nature doesn't play by anyone's rules. In a neighborhood near Topanga Canyon, residents are told they have minutes to evacuate. Sirens wail through the streets as cars line up in a frantic rush to get out. Some people are honking, shouting, their fear spilling over in chaotic bursts. Others sit in stunned silence, gripping the steering wheel as if it's the only thing anchoring them to reality. Among them is Carlos, a landscaper who's lived in the area for over 15 years. His truck is loaded with what he could grab: tools from his business, a few family photos, and his dog, Luna, who sits nervously in the passenger seat. "I don't know if I'll have anything to come back to," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't risk staying. The fire, it moves so fast, faster than you can imagine." Carlos isn't exaggerating. Just a few miles away, a firefighter radios in a desperate message: "The fire has jumped the containment line." It's a phrase that strikes fear into everyone listening. Containment lines are supposed to hold the fire back, to stop it from spreading. When those lines fail, it means the situation is spiraling out of control. In a command center downtown, the mood is tense. Maps of the fire's progression are spread across tables, red markers showing the areas already consumed by flames. The team of officials, scientists, and firefighters pores over data, trying to predict the fire's next move. But the Santa Ana winds are unpredictable, and every gust feels like a roll of the dice. "We've got neighborhoods in the direct path of this thing," one official says, his tone urgent. "If we don't slow it down, we're looking at catastrophic losses." Back at the front lines, Captain Ortega and his crew are fighting to protect a row of homes perched on a hillside. The heat is unbearable, even from a distance. Ortega's voice cracks through the radio, barking out orders to his team. "We need more water pressure here. Move, move, move." The team works in synchronized chaos, each member pushing their limits. But even with their combined effort, the fire feels unstoppable. In one of those houses, an elderly couple, the Thompsons, has refused to evacuate. They've lived there for over 40 years, and the thought of leaving everything behind is too much to bear. "We've been through fires before," Mr. Thompson says stubbornly, though his wife's anxious glances out the window tell a different story. As the flames inch closer, they finally realize the danger is too great. A firefighter pounds on their door, urging them to leave. "You don't have time to think. Just go," he shouts. As they drive away, their car packed with a few hastily gathered belongings, Mrs. Thompson clutches her husband's hand tightly. "I just hope we didn't wait too long," she says, her voice trembling. The fire is now moving toward Malibu, a community known for its stunning ocean views and celebrity homes. Helicopters fly overhead, dropping water onto the blaze, but it feels like a losing battle. The fire's sheer size and speed make it impossible to fully contain. From the ground, the sound of helicopters is constant, their engines roaring as they make pass after pass. Meanwhile, in the hills, a rescue team is working to evacuate a group of hikers who got trapped when the fire changed course. The hikers, covered in soot and visibly shaken, describe how the flames seemed to come out of nowhere. "We thought we were safe," one of them says, his voice still shaky. "And then suddenly, we weren't. It was like the fire had a mind of its own." At the evacuation center, the tension is unbearable. People huddle around phones and radios, desperate for news. Maria finally gets a call from a neighbor who stayed behind. The news isn't good. "It's gone," the neighbor says simply. Maria's knees buckle, and she sinks into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Everything's gone. Around her, others are receiving similar calls, their grief palpable in the room. The environmental toll is mounting too. Entire sections of the Angeles National Forest are now unrecognizable, the once vibrant green landscape reduced to smoldering ashes. Elena, the ecologist, surveys the damage with tears in her eyes. "We're losing so much more than trees," she says. "We're losing habitats, ecosystems. It's devastating." The air quality in Los Angeles has reached hazardous levels. Even those far from the fire are feeling its effects. Hospitals are seeing an increase in patients with respiratory issues, and schools have closed as a precaution. The city, known for its bright skies and vibrant energy, now feels heavy and suffocating. As night falls, the fire's glow lights up the horizon, a haunting reminder that the battle is far from over. The firefighters, the evacuees, the wildlife, all are caught in the grip of this relentless force. Every decision feels critical, every moment charged with urgency. But what happens next? Will the fire finally be contained, or will it continue its destructive march? And even if this fire is stopped, what about the next one? These questions hang in the air like the smoke that now blankets the city, leaving everyone on edge. This is the tipping point. The climax is near, but the resolution is still out of reach. For now, all anyone can do is hold their breath and hope for the winds to die down, for the fire to slow, and for a miracle to turn the tide. As the fire rages on, the situation takes an unexpected and chilling turn. Just when it seems the flames might be slowing, a new weather update sends shockwaves through the command center. Another round of Santa Ana winds is predicted to hit, stronger than before. The news spreads quickly, and with it, a sense of dread. These winds, known for their dry, forceful gusts, could push the fire into areas previously thought safe. The battle is about to get even more dangerous, and everyone knows it. In Malibu, a small team of firefighters is stationed near a historic ranch, a property that has stood for over a century. The team's leader, Sarah Blake, gets the call about the wind warning. She looks at her crew, already drained from hours of relentless firefighting, and says, "We've got to hold the line here. If this fire jumps, it could take out everything from here to the coast." Her voice is steady, but the tension in her eyes is impossible to miss. While Sarah's team braces for the worst, back at the evacuation center, the mood is shifting from despair to something more volatile. Rumors are swirling about how the fire started. Some say it was an electrical line failure. Others whisper about arson. The uncertainty only fuels people's frustration. Carlos, the landscaper, overhears a heated argument between two evacuees, one blaming the government for not maintaining infrastructure, the other pointing fingers at careless behavior in high-risk areas. "It doesn't matter how it started," Carlos mutters under his breath, shaking his head. "What matters is that it's happening." But then, a shocking update comes in. A new fire has ignited miles away, separate from the original blaze. The cause? A flare-up near a construction site, where sparks from heavy machinery are suspected to have caught dry brush. The second fire is smaller for now, but its location is dangerously close to a residential area. The news sends a ripple of panic through the city. Resources are already stretched thin, and now firefighters must split their efforts between two major fronts. In the command center, the tension is at a breaking point. Maps are updated frantically, and orders are shouted across the room. "We don't have the manpower for this," one firefighter says, his voice strained. "We're barely keeping up with the first fire." The officials exchange uneasy glances, weighing their options. Every decision feels like a gamble. For the evacuees, the second fire feels like an insult added to injury. Maria sits in stunned silence as the news plays on a small TV in the corner of the shelter. "How much more can this city take?" she whispers, her voice filled with exhaustion. Around her, others are glued to their phones, watching live updates with growing fear. Meanwhile, out in the hills, the second fire is moving faster than expected. Winds are pushing it toward a densely populated neighborhood, and evacuation orders are issued in record time. Families scramble to pack what they can, the chaos mirroring scenes from days earlier. For some, this is the second time they've had to flee in less than a week. "It feels like a nightmare you can't wake up from," one evacuee says, tears streaming down her face as she helps her elderly mother into a car. The wildlife rescue teams are also overwhelmed. Elena, the ecologist, receives a desperate call from a colleague near the second fire. A sanctuary for rescued animals is in its path, and there's little time to act. "We're doing everything we can," she says into the phone, but the helplessness in her voice is unmistakable. She grabs her gear and heads toward the sanctuary, determined to save as many animals as possible, even as the flames draw closer. Back at the original fire, Captain Ortega's team is facing their own crisis. The winds have arrived earlier than expected, and the fire is spreading unpredictably. "We need backup," Ortega shouts into his radio, but he knows the resources are tied up with the second fire. His crew works tirelessly, but the flames are relentless. The air is thick with smoke, making it hard to breathe, and the heat is almost unbearable. And then, in the middle of the chaos, a spark of hope appears. Literally. A firefighter spots a small patch of unburned brush where they can create a backburn, a controlled fire meant to consume fuel and stop the main blaze from advancing. It's a risky move, especially with the winds, but Ortega makes the call. "It's now or never," he says, his voice resolute. As the backburn is ignited, the crew watches anxiously, knowing that if the wind shifts even slightly, their plan could backfire, literally. The flames roar to life, creating an intense heat wave that feels like a wall pressing against them. For a moment, it's unclear whether the tactic will work. And then, a roar louder than the fire itself breaks through the night, the sound of a collapsing structure. A house near the edge of the fire line has succumbed to the flames, its walls crumbling in a fiery explosion. The sight freezes everyone in place, a stark reminder of what's at stake. Ortega shakes himself out of it, barking orders to his team to refocus. "We can't lose sight of what we're here to do," he shouts, his voice cutting through the chaos. The night stretches on, each moment more intense than the last. The two fires burn in tandem, their smoke plumes visible from across the city. Helicopters crisscross the sky, their water drops providing brief moments of relief, but never enough to fully stop the flames. As dawn approaches, the fires show no sign of slowing, and the winds are expected to continue throughout the day. The city is holding its breath, waiting to see what will happen next. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the sense of urgency is impossible to ignore. This isn't just about one fire or even two. It's about a city on the brink, a way of life being tested, and a question no one can escape. How much longer can this go on? As the sun rises over Los Angeles, the city wakes to a grim reality. The fires, relentless through the night, have claimed more ground. Exhausted firefighters regroup at their stations, their faces etched with soot and wariness. In the command center, the atmosphere is tense but resolute. The two fires are now massive and dangerously close to merging, which could spell an uncontrollable disaster. Every decision made at this point feels like a critical moment in a high-stakes game. Captain Ortega stands with his team, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of the fire. Overnight, their backburn strategy had slowed the original blaze, but the second fire, driven by those fierce winds, is now bearing down on residential neighborhoods. Ortega takes a deep breath, rallying his crew. "This isn't over. We've bought some time, but now we fight to protect what's left," he says, his voice carrying both exhaustion and determination. In Malibu, Sarah Blake's team has reached a breaking point. They've been battling to save the historic ranch all night, but the fire is too strong. "We have to pull back," Sarah finally says, the words heavy with defeat. The team retreats, leaving behind a place that has stood for generations. As they watch the flames consume the ranch, there's a moment of stunned silence. It feels like the fire is taking more than just property. It's taking pieces of the city's soul. Meanwhile, Elena, the ecologist, is racing against time to rescue the animals from the sanctuary. With the help of volunteers, she's managed to load several animals into transport trucks. But the fire is closing in fast, and the smoke is thick, making visibility almost impossible. Just as she's about to leave, she hears a faint bark coming from one of the enclosures. It's a dog, forgotten in the chaos. Without hesitation, Elena runs back, covering her mouth with her sleeve to filter the choking air. Moments later, she emerges with the dog in her arms, coughing but triumphant. As the fires rage on, the evacuees gather around TVs and phones, watching the live coverage with a mix of fear and hope. Maria sits with her neighbors, clutching her phone tightly. Suddenly, a news update interrupts the broadcast. Firefighters have managed to divert the second fire from the residential area, pushing it toward a natural fire break where it can be more easily controlled. A wave of relief sweeps through the room, but it's short-lived. The fires are still burning, and the winds are still a threat. Then comes the twist. In the midst of the firefighting efforts, investigators release a preliminary report on the cause of the original blaze. It wasn't an accident. Evidence points to human involvement, likely arson. The revelation sends shockwaves through the community. The idea that someone might have intentionally started a fire of this magnitude is almost too much to bear. Carlos, sitting in his truck near the evacuation center, hears the news on the radio. His grip tightens on the steering wheel. "Arson?" he mutters, shaking his head in disbelief. Who would do something like this? The revelation stirs a mix of anger and sadness among the evacuees. It's one thing to lose everything to nature, but to know that someone may have caused this devastation? It feels like a betrayal. Back on the front lines, the combined efforts of firefighters, volunteers, and emergency responders are finally starting to pay off. The winds begin to die down, giving the crews a chance to gain the upper hand. Helicopters drop massive amounts of water while ground teams create new containment lines. Slowly, the flames start to retreat. In the early hours of the next morning, the announcement comes. The fires are finally under control. There's no celebration, only a heavy sense of relief. The city has been scarred, its people tested in ways they never imagined. But for now, the immediate danger has passed. As the smoke clears, the extent of the damage becomes heartbreakingly clear. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to ashes. Families sift through the rubble of their homes, searching for anything that might have survived. For Maria, there's nothing left but the foundation. She kneels in the dirt, picking up a charred piece of wood. "It's just stuff," she says, trying to convince herself. "We're alive. That's what matters." Carlos, who stayed with his truck throughout the ordeal, drives back to his neighborhood to find it miraculously untouched. He feels a wave of gratitude, but can't ignore the guilt of being one of the lucky ones. "Why me?" he whispers, looking around at the devastation nearby. And then, as the city begins the long process of recovery, the final twist emerges. Investigators identify a suspect in the arson case, a local resident who had a history of reckless behavior near fire-prone areas. The motive is unclear, but the arrest sends a clear message. The anger in the community is palpable, but so is the determination to prevent something like this from happening again. As the documentary draws to a close, the focus shifts to the resilience of the people of Los Angeles. Neighbors come together to rebuild, offering each other support in the face of unimaginable loss. The firefighters, hailed as heroes, share their stories of bravery and camaraderie. Elena, now a local icon, continues her work to rehabilitate wildlife affected by the fire. The final shots linger on the blackened hills, the charred remains of trees standing like ghostly sentinels against the sky. The fires may be out, but the scars they've left on the land, on the people, will take years to heal. And yet, amidst the destruction, there's a glimmer of hope. Los Angeles has been tested, but it's still standing. And as the screen fades to black, the final question hangs in the air. In a world growing hotter and drier, how can we prevent the next disaster before it begins? The answer remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The fight is far from over. In the days that follow, Los Angeles begins to heal, but the weight of what's been lost hangs heavy in the air. Families who once called the hillsides home now find themselves navigating a new reality, displaced, grieving, and trying to find a path forward. Relief efforts flood in from across the country, with volunteers arriving to help clear debris, distribute supplies, and offer a kind word when there's little else to give. For many, it's a small reminder that even in the face of such destruction, humanity's ability to care for one another remains steadfast. Maria sits outside a temporary shelter, the charred piece of wood from her home still in her hands. A local news crew approaches her, asking how she's coping. She takes a moment, searching for the right words. "It's hard," she admits, her voice trembling. "But I look around, and I see people helping each other, strangers becoming friends. That's what gives me hope. We'll rebuild. It won't be the same, but we'll make it home again." Carlos, after ensuring his neighborhood was safe, has thrown himself into helping others. He spends his days volunteering with a cleanup crew, hauling away ash and rubble. One afternoon, he meets a family who lost everything: their home, their car, even their family photos. The father shakes Carlos's hand, his grip firm despite the tears in his eyes. "Thank you for being here," he says simply. In that moment, Carlos feels a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was searching for. Elena, meanwhile, has turned her focus to the long-term effects of the fires on wildlife. She's organizing a team of volunteers to replant native vegetation in the burned areas, creating habitats for animals that survived the blaze. "It's not just about rebuilding homes for people," she says during an interview. "It's about restoring balance. Nature has a way of healing, but it needs our help after something like this." The city itself begins to assess what went wrong and what can be done to prevent future disasters. Officials hold public meetings to address community concerns, from updating emergency response plans to improving infrastructure. The arrest of the suspected arsonist has sparked debates about accountability and mental health, with some calling for harsher penalties and others advocating for a deeper understanding of the underlying causes that lead to such acts. In one of these meetings, Captain Ortega speaks up, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We can't just fight fires as they come," he says. "We need to focus on prevention. That means better education, better planning, and better resources for the people on the front lines." His words are met with applause, a rare moment of unity in a room often filled with heated debates. The scars left by the fires are visible everywhere, from the blackened hillsides to the somber expressions of those who lived through it. But there are also signs of resilience. Community centers are filled with donated clothes, toys, and household items for those starting over. Local artists paint murals on the sides of buildings, transforming the city's pain into vibrant expressions of hope and renewal. One mural, in particular, captures everyone's attention. It's painted on a wall near one of the evacuation centers and depicts a firefighter holding a child, surrounded by animals fleeing the flames. Above them, the words "Together we rise" are written in bold letters. People stop to take photos, some even leaving flowers or notes at the base of the wall. It becomes a symbol of the city's strength and determination to rebuild. The investigation into the fires continues, with experts analyzing how the conditions became so ripe for disaster. Climate scientists warn that without significant changes, these kinds of events will only become more frequent and more intense. It's a sobering reminder that while the fires may be out, the underlying issues, drought, rising temperatures, and urban expansion into fire-prone areas, remain. In the final days of filming, we revisit Sarah Blake, who stands near the remains of the historic ranch she fought so hard to save. The air is still thick with the smell of smoke, but new shoots of grass are already starting to push through the blackened soil. She kneels down, running her fingers over the fragile green blades. "It's amazing, isn't it?" she says, a faint smile on her face. "Life finds a way, even after everything." As the documentary draws to a close, the camera pans across the city, capturing moments of quiet resilience. A child playing in a park untouched by the flames. A firefighter laughing with his crew as they clean their equipment. A family planting a small tree in the yard of their rebuilt home. The narrator's voice breaks the silence, offering a final reflection. Los Angeles has faced the unimaginable, and while the fires have left scars, they've also revealed something extraordinary: the strength of a community determined to rise from the ashes. The road ahead won't be easy, but if there's one thing we've learned, it's that together we can weather any storm or fire. This city isn't just about buildings or landmarks. It's about the people who call it home. And as long as they stand together, Los Angeles will endure. The screen fades to black, but the echoes of the story linger, a reminder of the fragility of our world and the power we have to protect it. It's not just about recovering from disaster. It's about learning, adapting, and fighting for a future where such tragedies become less frequent. The credits roll, accompanied by images of firefighters, volunteers, and residents working side by side. Their faces tell a story of loss, resilience, and hope,